County Council and the Board of Commissioners to order on this Wednesday, May 20th at 5 p.m. Tiffany, will you please take roll call for council?
Yes, ma'am. Brian Baird.
Here.
Kevin Walls.
Present.
Ron West.
Present.
Ron Bates.
Present.
John Dittmer.
Here.
Emma Burton.
Here.
Michelle Ann Graves.
Here.
John Mollers.
Here.
Belinda Grissom.
Here.
And the one and only John Myers.
Here. Or the two of you. Well, we'll go for that. I'll go ahead and open this special joint meeting for the Board of Commissioners. We don't need a roll call, but if you would care to pray with us, Ron, can you pray for us? And if
bow with me for a moment of prayer, please. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the beautiful weather we get sometimes. I think we may be in a little overload right now on rain, Lord, so we could get a little relief there. Dear Lord, I just pray that you be with us this evening as we look at these budget numbers for the year 2027. Try to calculate what's best for the people of Johnson County and what we can do to assist them in their daily lives as far as affordability. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
And with that, Mr. Mike Reuter, you are the star of the evening.
Okay.
Thank
well,
you for
thank
being
you.
here.
And good to see everyone this evening. Let me just kind of start off with some comments about the last legislative session. Of course, last year at this time, we had gone through a pretty intense legislative session. It was a long session. There was a lot of conversation about property tax reform.
Could you pull your microphone a little closer? I'm so
Sure.
sorry, sir.
Is that better?
So much
Okay.
better.
I'll get
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you. So we were going through some pretty significant changes at the end of that session, and going into this one, I did not anticipate that we would have too much change in terms of further property tax reform, and that turned out to be true. There was not a lot of a movement with what they had passed the prior year. There was a lot of conversation as it relates to local option income tax, and I'll talk about that as we go through the fiscal plan and some of the decisions that you're going to face as a county council in the coming years. There was also a couple favorable changes that I actually did not anticipate. For the last 3 years, the state has moved away from the 6-year non-farm personal income factor. Some of you heard me say that mouthful over the years, and they just simply capped and limited the amount of property tax to 4% increase each year. We were fortunate in this county that we were able to qualify for a growth appeal. In other words, we had enough growth within the county that allowed us to surpass that 4% until last year. Last year was the first year we had stopped qualifying for that growth appeal. And that was pretty significant because we were getting some pretty substantial increases prior to that. But the good news, I guess, was I was fully anticipating that they were going to cap it again at 4%. And there was an attempt to do that they would cap that maximum levy again for 2027. And that did not happen. We are now going back to the 6-year non-farm personal income factor. And that is actually good news because that factor is calculating something closer to 6% versus a 4% increase in the levy. That's not unique to you. This is a statewide factor. So levies for all the counties and cities and towns and townships and libraries will have access to an increase, what I'm estimating to be about 5.9%. The maximum it could be is 6%. So I'm estimating pretty close to that 6% number. So that's actually 2% better than what I would have expected. So that was a good change. Another change that they made that was a subtle change, but I wasn't expecting is They are going to allow the units to put all of the excise tax into one fund if you so choose. In the past, excise tax has been prorated to the funds that have property tax. Excise is distributed based on the tax rate. And this would allow you to put all of the excise tax into one fund. And I think at the end of this meeting, you'll give me some direction on that, because I think I know where you'll want to go, because that would allow us to move some excise tax out of restricted funds and put it into an unrestricted fund. And I'll point those out as we go through the fiscal plan. So I did not make that assumption that you're going to do that yet. I wanted to have this conversation with you tonight before we enter into the next budget season. And tonight is just for information. You're not going to be asked to vote on anything. This is just kind of a preview to what I'm kind of seeing in the crystal ball going into this next year. Of course, we don't have a certified maximum levy. We don't have the local option income tax. I feel like as you know, I tend to be conservative when I try to estimate, and so I feel like they might be a little better than my estimates when at the end of the day. But anyway, so coming out of this session, there were a couple favorable changes, but there was also more changes with local option income tax, and I'll dive into that a little bit later. But I'm going to start off if you want to follow along on your copy or if online. Now, if I refer to a page number, if you're looking at the electronic version, you'll need to add 2 pages for the content page and the cover page. So if I say page 25, and that's where I'm going to go, I'm referring to this page in the bottom corner. If you would, and if you're looking at the PDF, you would go to page 27. So, can we get this one that's kind of fuzzy here? Isn't that? That's a little bit better. Yeah, this one's clear over here, but this one's a little fuzzier. So, okay. So the 6-year non-farm personal income has been in place for a number of years. It was a pretty significant change years ago as part of a previous property tax reform bill. And the logic of it at that time was they really didn't want property tax in the state of Indiana going up faster than the income in the state. And so they came up with what's this 6-year non-farm personal income factor. And we have lived by that factor for a long time now. And now we are going back to it. But for the last 3 years, we've made the calculation, but it's just been overridden with that 4% maximum. And if you look in that 26 column, you'll see it there right next to the 6% to the right of it, 1.059. That is an assumption that is a 5.9% increase. This year had it calculated for this year, it would have maxed out at 6%. But again, they overrode that and kept it at 4%. So that number should be pretty close to what the state certifies. We should know that probably in the next month and a half or so that we'll get an official number on that. But I don't anticipate much movement out of that. One of the reasons that it is actually higher is when you average something 6 years, you're reaching back pretty far. And one of the years that is included is the year 2021. And if you go back to that, you can see that income in the state, which is pretty substantial, was double digits. It was 10.7%. But what was happening in 2021? The pandemic. And the federal government was putting out a lot of dollars to try and prop up the economy. So that's one reason why I'd say I'm surprised that they allowed to go back to this, because it includes kind of, in my opinion, a year that's not the norm. But nevertheless, that's where we are. And so the next page I want to go to is page 26, just the very next page. This is the maximum levy calculation, and you can see I've highlighted here across the top, or in the middle there, about a third of the way down, the 1.04. That was the maximum that was allowed in those 3 years. But if you go about 2/3 of the way down, you'll see that you see the appeal amounts that we were qualifying for. So there, right here, there's a line called growth factor. And the last year that we received a growth appeal was 2025, and that was for $1.7 million. And then, of course, in 2026, we did not qualify. And so we are now, the county are going to be living based on that 6-year non-farm personal income factor because growth appeals were taken away. It's not even an option going forward. So now maybe that'll change in the future, but this is what we're operating under right now. And that maximum levy, if you go to the next page, page 27, you calculate the maximum levy, and then that levy is shared among the general fund, reassessment, animal shelter, cumulative bridge, and health. So when you think of, even though those are individual funds with individual tax rates, they share the same revenue source. If you raise one, that means another one's got to go down. And so your bottom line is the same. But I've always said to you, and you've heard me say this multiple times, when you think of the health department and animal control, those are in the maximum levy. If you were to raise one of those rates, dollars come from the general fund. If you were to lower one of those rates, dollars go back to the general fund. A bigger change, though, that you need to note is what we did with cumulative bridge this last year. We did some revamping and pulled those dollars back into a cumulative bridge fund. And you'll see here that line cumulative bridge, 5.9 million that we put on there for 2026. But what did that do? Look at the top number there on the general fund. You can see we went from 22 million to 17 million. So really, the highway department was budgeting dollars in the general fund and CCD. We've changed that strategy now, and we've come up with a levy on the cumulative bridge fund. And so I've anticipated that you will lower that this next year. When the highway department was building what they would need, they thought they would need a little better than $3 million a year for bridges. This year we had set the levy higher, trying to build some cash balance up in there. And if you remember, we had actually moved some cash balance there from the cumulative bridge fund about 3 years ago, but then we set the levy higher in 2026 to get some of that levy back to the cumulative bridge fund. But that is an estimate of about $3.7 million then going forward in that fund. So anyway, you can see back in 21 and 22, we had a major bridge levy, or excuse me, not major bridge, cumulative bridge, and then it was 000. And now we're back to collecting that in that fund. So just want you to be aware of that was a pretty significant change in the 2026 budget. Page 45, local option income tax. Now, what happened in this last session? What happened in this last session? They had in Senate Enrolled Act 1 in 2025, they had made some pretty significant changes to LIT with an implementation date of 2028. And you would have had to make decisions no later than October 1st, 2027 for that change. They have moved that date out a year, and now the effective year for all LIT reform will happen in the year 2029, which means you'll have to make some decisions sometime before October 1st, 2028. So we have some time to think about that and work through that. You may have heard of a group called MUST. It's an acronym. I don't know. I can't even tell you the exact what that means, but it basically is a provision that allows a person from each municipality, the fiscal officer, and one county council member to get together and discuss what LIT rates might need to be. But you're supposed to come to a unanimous decision, and I think that will be very difficult to do this early. I think you could have the conversation, but I think it might be difficult to get out there with any real decisions this early because I think there will be a lot of conversation, potentially even changes yet this next legislative session. So, I don't know that anybody is going to want to go out on a limb with that and say these are going to be the rates. You're fortunate enough, there's enough income tax base that you're probably not going to struggle with the caps, the county unit. There will be some units within the county that will potentially struggle with their caps. From your perspective, I think we're going to get through it pretty easy when it comes to the county funding. The county's portion of the funding, I think, is actually going to be relatively easy because we know how much you're collecting now in lit for what's called CAGIT. And basically that's the expenditure rate. It's 1%. We know how much you generate from that now. And then you have the jail lit rate, which is set at 0.2. Well, we would replace that rate. Then we would look at the economic development money, which you're getting, your portion, and then we would set a rate to make that up if you so choose. So when it comes to funding your particular budget, I think that we'll be able to get to those decisions pretty quickly. Where you're going to get, where you, the council, are going to get pressure is from some of the other units, because now you have the ability to establish a fire rate and how that money is distributed. And so this isn't unique to you. This is statewide, right? You might get pressure to adopt a fire rate to lessen the city municipal rate that they have the ability to collect. You'll also be expected to adopt a lit rate for the townships and as well as the libraries. And so those will be your decisions, but it doesn't actually affect per se your revenue, because we will be able to set your revenues pretty easily on the known, what we know you collect now, because you collect countywide. What we don't have real good data on yet, we're starting to get some data, but how much money is collected in municipality? We've never tracked local option income tax by municipalities before. We have only known local option income tax to be countywide numbers, and then we've distributed it based on property tax. And that's what we're moving away from. We are no longer going to be distributing lit on a property tax formula. It will be what you collect is what you receive, and based on the rates you set. And so that will be a challenge for you moving forward. So, but I do have some good news on local option income tax going into this budget cycle. And this screen's not real clear, but that one's a little better. I've bolded off the page the year 2024. That may sound crazy, like, well, that's the last known year we know of how much money we collected in the county. That is a calendar year number. And if you think back, April 15th, we were all just filing our 2025 returns. And then you have all those that file for extensions. It takes time to know what we really collected in the year 2025. So the last known year that we have is 2024. And I'm happy to report that number is up 9.22% countywide. So that's pretty strong. And so what that did is, like, all right, our actual collections was much higher than what they distributed. And we're going to get a special distribution. And that special distribution was just certified this last week. And I've got that built in here countywide. Now, this is just the expenditure rate portion. We'll get about 11.2 million, almost $11.3 million. That's countywide number. Okay, that's not jail lit, that's not edit, that's the expenditure rate revenue. And so that revenue actually will come out in the 2026 revenue, should be by June 1. So that's not too far away. So that came in higher than what I had been including in the fiscal plan. I'm still using, in my opinion, conservative estimates moving forward. I'm using we've seen some ups and downs in lit, and it's almost impossible to predict just one year to the next what that's going to be. Sometimes it's due to timing issues, but what I've done is looked at a real dollar amount increase over the last 10 years and kind of projected that going forward. And so that's in my opinion, a conservative way to to forecast what that might be. Now, again, I'm forecasting to the year 2029 on the old model. But my assumption is when you get to that point, you would adopt a rate that will replace this one, that would replace this, and that you would keep a similar portion of lit that you've been used to receiving. The assessed valuation page, let's see, page 24. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I was talking to the county assessor just right before the meeting. We've seen some of the notices go out, notices of assessment for 2026, 27, and I'm kind of hearing some mixed results across the state. Some are actually going up quite a bit more than others. There were some adjustments to the cost tables for commercial that produced some higher AVs on commercial property. Residential is we're not seeing 2023 and 24 anymore. We're getting 20% increases on residential. So a little bit of a mixed bag there. Some are going up, just kind of depends on the area that you're living in. But in last year, we saw a significant growth in the AV, 12.3%. That was much higher than even the two prior years. So that was really strong. But now when you look in the out years there, like, all right, what's going on there? Now, this is not a scientific estimate. Okay, we can do that with a group that I work with now, Policy Analytics, but this is not a scientific estimate. But what I'm trying to show you is that in 27, we're going to really start to ramp up the deductions that people are receiving. And what I mean by that is we're going to go from a 40% supplemental deduction right now to 66.7% by the year 2031. So if you have a house that's $300,000 by the year 2031, you'll only be paying on $100,000 of the value. And so we're going to see our tax base erode because of that much higher deduction coming on all those residential properties. What we're also going to see in actually this started for 2026. Residential rental property for the first time is receiving a deduction that used to receive zero deduction. That is now starting at 6% in 26 and going to 33% by the year 2031. So rental properties, about a third of that value will be removed between now and then, depending on what other assessments may go up. But when they get to that year, they'll be taking off 1/3. Yes, Ron.
Mike, my understanding on rental properties, they're already getting a sizable deduction because they're using the income approach. And we've had some examples where we had a home with a private individual, and the assessed value was $250,000. Right next door, comparable house, $130,000 assessed value because they're using the income approach. So why would they qualify for any kind of a exemption?
That's not the first time I've heard that comment, and I just heard that recently up north when I was presenting that there were some observations of homeowners that were saying, "Hey, the house value is pretty much the same house and it's not being assessed the same." But for whatever reason, in the last session, 2025, that was part of the property tax reform, and that they wanted to give residential rental property a 33% deduction. And so it's starting off at 6. Now, maybe we won't get to the year 2031 and they'll turn that off. Maybe those things start to come to light. But right now, it's scheduled to be a third deduction by the year 2031.
And there was no discussion about doing away with the income approach?
I can't answer that. I don't know what conversations.
Wow.
Yeah. So that too will take tax base away.
Yeah.
And then also in 27, there wasn't time to enact it in 26, but in 27, business personal property changes. where it had been a threshold of 80,000 or more would report personal property. Now that's $2 million. Our assessor just shared with me that, we had about 7,000 returns before, and now we're going to have about 700. And so there's tax base there that is going to get erased in 2026, pay 27. So those things are all working against us on our tax base. We're still growing as a county and values still look strong, but those deductions and things are working against that tax base as we try to forecast that. Now, that was always really important to us on the growth appeal because we're always getting that AV to grow and we'd appeal that based on that growth appeal. That's no longer a factor, so that doesn't matter so much. But what it is going to do, it's going to drive up tax rates. And that was kind of I think that's expected. I don't think that will be a surprise to legislators that they expect tax rates to rise. And you're going to see yours, what I'm showing, I think conservatively, but we're going to show a tax increase. But where we've always talked about tax rates, we're going to have to talk about tax levies now, because we'll need to explain to the community when we adopt the budget, this is how much the county is asking their levy to go up. Now, maybe your levy goes up, not you, maybe the taxpayer's levy or tax bill goes up or down. You're not controlling how it's calculated. You're just telling the community like, hey, we're going to be collecting 5.9% more money for our operations. And that covers the growth in the county and it covers the cost of living. I think in your particular case, I think that's reasonable. I mean, you are experiencing growth and you are also experiencing cost of living increases. You get in a community that's declining, maybe not growing, asking the community to pay 5.9% might be a bigger ask. But in your particular case, I think 5.9% is probably a reasonable ask, to increase that levy the next year, but it will show as a tax rate increase. But those deductions coming on, the expectation is with the higher deductions they get, even though you're raising your rate, they will pay less. That's the thought process behind it. So it is a Rubik's Cube.
So the trade-off there obviously is the reduction in AV makes the rate go up,
Yeah,
but the exemptions they get on the other side
yeah.
should more to compensate for what they lose in
the rates go up.
increase. Yeah. Wow.
So quite a bit happening there. And I would describe this, I actually appreciate their approach that they just didn't do this all at once. I kind of call it wading into the water because we're starting here and we're going to that by 2031. Maybe the pressure gets too much and they go, hey, we can't get there, and they could change the law.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they will, or they could get more aggressive with it. They could step it up, so this is just what we know today. So next year will be a long session and kind of depending on what happens with assessments, there may be more conversation about how they assess. So time will tell on that.
Well, and I think the other thing is it depends on how many of our legislators own rental property and how many of them are involved in big corporations.
Yeah.
I gotta say it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my
Yeah.
job.
Okay, now we're going to page 1. We're going to get into some real numbers now and what's all this mean? What's this mean to Johnson County's budget? Our budget's a little bit unique in how we're moving forward because we've been building dollars. You're in a very strong cash position, but that was by design. We have been building dollars for highway for over the last 3 years. And so that has been showing up in the cash reserves of the county. For example, in 2023, we had budgeted $4 million for highway. We didn't spend it. Knowing that we budgeted, we didn't spend it, it became cash. The next year, we budgeted $8 million. We didn't spend it, it became cash. Last year, we budgeted $12 million. We didn't spend it and became cash. The highway department came in, and this was my recommendation at the time, to come in each year and do an additional appropriation, then to reappropriate those dollars to tie that cash balance back up. So you don't have the sense like, oh, that's cash balance available. So, and that's happened. They have appropriated $12 million. And so our budget, if you look at the highlighted spot there, you would see that the budget looks like it's out of balance $12.7 million. But you have to note that that's the cash that we had been building up over that period of time. So, there's a couple numbers I want to note here because there's one that could get better. Under revenue, the second line down, you'll see loss from circuit breaker. And we've always been dealing with circuit breaker losses. But I have been seeing and this is not always true, but I have been seeing in some of the reports that are being developed by Policy Analytics that in some cases in growth communities and depending on the tax rates, I'm actually seeing that the circuit breaker loss is going down. And the reason being, if you think about it, when a person is paying only 1/3 of their assessment, they have a long way to go to get to 1%. The tax rates have to be really high to get to 1%. So there's been some, I don't know if those were intended results, but I'm starting to see that in some modeling, and we could talk about this later and dive into this more, but in some of the modeling, I've actually seen where circuit breaker starts to decrease because people are not hitting the caps. And so that means whatever we levy, we're collecting more of. Now, a new one, the next line down there, loss from property tax credit. That is a new one. That was really what got Senate Bill 1 last year over the finish line. The governor obviously was pushing pretty hard for tax cuts. And so this was a credit, not a further deduction in the assessed valuation. You basically calculate the tax bill and you get up to a 10% credit or a maximum of $300 deduction. So the $300,000 house again, the maximum tax bill for a $300,000 house with a 1% is $3,000. That's the 1% cap. They now in that model would get $300 off of that. So now their net tax bill would be $2,700. So anyway, we're actually below the 1% cap now for residential rental property when you think about that credit. So it's actually taking a little bit below 1%, but that is new. And there was a change in that this year in this last session that wasn't so good. Last year, I think it was a slip that they did not specify that loss could not be taken in the debt fund. And they corrected that this year. And they're saying you cannot take any of that loss from that credit in your debt fund. And so that means it moves to the remaining funds with property tax levies, your general fund, your cumulative bridge fund. So my estimate has increased on the loss on that as a result, because where we were taking some of the debt loss in the debt fund, the reason that it was advantage in the debt fund, because we can make that money up by raising the levy to make up for it. But that is no longer the case. But there's some positive there because we're going to be able to more than offset that with some excise tax movement. So we'll talk about that in a minute. This is not a red flag, but just early indicator is I had a little caution flag out, and this is not a new caution flag. Last year at the budget time, I was starting to see a reversing of our trend in our revenues over expenditures, mostly because we stopped qualifying for that growth appeal. But when you see in 27, I'm showing about if again, this is a really, really, really early estimate, right? So don't hold me to this because I'll tell you what, we're going to go through a budget process, going to change all that. But this is an early preview just on the things I know today, that there is a structural $1.7 million issue there going into 27. So not a huge thing. I'm going to show you some places how we can already correct some of that. But and I do have, obviously wage increases built in here. Right now, I just used a higher percent. I don't know what you're going to give or what budget instructions you are going to tell them, but I do have obviously some wage increase built in here. So that will obviously depend on your direction. The general fund is in a very strong cash position, but structurally, I'm starting to see some issue starting in the next couple of years, just depending. Now, I will tell you, I was also being very conservative with the interest in here. And I think I might be able to revise that the next time I get back with you on your budget. Everybody I think was anticipating rates to start to decline each year. And I had modeled that in that we would not be, wasn't that long ago, we weren't getting any interest, not because we weren't investing, it's just there was no return on it, right? Well, people started getting 5% interest and those are real dollars, real big dollars. But, rates aren't declining right now. So we might be able to adjust that assumption some to kind of correct for some of that as well. So I had been assuming that rate would have been declining. The next page, page 2, property reassessment. This levy is really fixed, but there was also a change at the last fall. So there are 3 miscellaneous revenues that go into funds that have property tax. It's FIT, financial institutions tax, excise tax, and CVIT, commercial vehicle excise tax. Last fall, the state came out and said, hey, you can put all the CVIT and FIT into, you can put all that into your general fund. You don't need to separate it out. And that wasn't a bad change. So there were relatively small numbers. But in the legislative session, though, they've said you can now take that same approach with excise tax. And so in this case, I'm forecasting in 27 that the reassessment fund would get $67,000 in excise tax. What I will probably recommend to you is that you go ahead and move that $67,000 to the general fund. But we would move $67,000 of expense out of this fund to follow it into the general fund. And you actually moved some of the reassessment budget last year from this fund to the general fund because we had a structural issue. We were going through cash and we are still going through cash. And that is fine because we have a pretty substantial balance in this fund. And we don't need to take, you took steps last year to start to correct that. It's still not perfect, but we've got plenty of cash to do that. But my point being is we would take the excise tax out, move it to the general fund, would take a little more of the budget out and move it with that revenue. You'll get some logic to this as we go through other funds, but this is kind of the first place that excise tax conversation starts to show up. Page 5, animal shelter. Already said this, but just a reminder that this is, think of this as even separate rate and levy. Think of it as department in your general fund. And so I basically, when I set a levy on this, I'm putting enough property tax in it to balance the budget. Okay, so right now we're putting about $1.5 million in that fund. I've estimated that we need about $1.6 million next year to fund that. So an increase, but nothing substantial. When you look at the bottom of 26, you'll see just shy of $900,000 in cash there. I've always recommended to you, this is not a formal policy. I've always recommended that you maintain 50% of your ensuing year property tax as your cash balance. And so if that were the case, $1.6 million, 50% is $800,000. So you have $893,000. That gets you from January to June settlement. It covers all your settlement without the auditor having to make any kind of a temporary loan. So that may look like a big cash balance, but there is a purpose for that cash balance in that fund. The next page is the rainy day fund, page 6. This is something you might want to consider. We actually have been spending down some of the rainy day balance. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but at the end of 22, we had $6.5 million. And we have spent some of those dollars down, and I'm anticipating, if we don't appropriate any more than what we have right now, we'd end with about $3.5 million. Now you can transfer from general fund to rainy day up to 10% of the total budget, not just the general fund budget. So it's a big number you could transfer, and I'm not saying you should do that much, but we do have a strong cash balance in the general fund. And you would have that option if you so choose anytime during the year to say, hey, we want to move some of that cash to the rainy day fund and rebalance that.
Could you repeat that for me, Mike? 10% of
The
the,
total budget, it's not limited to just the general fund, it's the total budget, and that would include like animal control and health and CCD and those budgets that are in there. And so it would be a large number and probably larger than what you would want to transfer. But if you come up with a dollar amount that you say, hey, we want to move 3.5 million to get that back to 6.5 million, that would be below your 10%. So to give you some idea, but I don't have that number. I apologize. I don't have that number what that 10% is, but it'd be large enough that you probably wouldn't even want to transfer that much of it. So, but I guess my point being is, our general fund cash did go up, but we have spent some of the rainy day balance over the last 3 years. Page 7. This is the highway fund. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This has a strong cash balance, but of course it doesn't take too many highway projects to go through a lot of cash, as you're finding out as you put these out to bid. One thing here to note, I've not built it in here. I'm hoping it's temporary, but the longer we go, it's not so temporary. But the governor announced that gas tax relief. And that I have not factored that in right now. It's only 1 month, but how long will they keep that in place? Because if they keep giving that relief on the gas tax, there will be less dollars at the state to distribute, and gas tax affect local roads and streets and highway. Now, 1 month is not going to make a big swing one way or the other, and it will eventually come back on. I believe it would come back on eventually. But I just want to make that note that this might be a little on the aggressive side, on the high side for 26. I don't think those out years, it's an aggressive estimate, but for 26, it might be a little high. That might be what we see. In the state comes out with some estimates, what they expect your highway distribution to be and what they expect your local road and streets distribution to be. That might be our first indicator. How long do they plan to keep this in place? So that's a caution flag, because that's one that could affect our budgeting process and could have the highway department going, hey, I don't have as much money. That might be a reason why. Again, very strong cash balance. Page 9, local roads and streets. I won't spend a lot of time on here. I'll try to move a little faster here so we stay within the hour. Strong cash balance, $2.3 million estimate at the end of 26. Again, 2.3 million may sound like a lot, but it would not take too many roads to get rid of one road to get rid of that much. Page 10, cumulative bridge fund. The highway department has appropriated via additional appropriation all of the balance. When we budgeted about $3+ million. He has appropriated the full anticipated revenue of 2026, but he does not plan to spend all those dollars in 26. So I think that we will see a cash balance at the end of the year. But right now you do have all the cash balance tied up in the cumulative bridge fund. And I've raised the levy high enough in 27 to fund what I would anticipate those expenditures to be more in that $3.3 million range. I believe that's what he had been planning on the future. As he pulled some things out of cumulative bridge and pulled some things out of general fund, that he needed about a little better than $3 million a year in cumulative bridge. Now we'll refine that more, but I think that should be close based on what we talked about last fall. But you can see, though, we have to raise the levy higher than that budget because of the loss of the circuit breaker and because of the loss of the new credit. Now, this is a place, too, that we could move $211,000 of excise tax to the general fund. But what we do then is just raise the levy $200,000 more to make up for that loss. So we'd move the excise tax to the general fund. We'd take levy from the general fund. It's a wash. But it will become easier to budget, I believe, for everyone if we get all the excise tax into the general fund. The fewer miscellaneous revenues that are in all these other funds, the easier it will be to forecast going forward some of those results. Next page is the health fund. Again, I won't spend much time on this. We have a healthy balance. I put enough property tax in it to fund the next year's budget. Next year's property tax levy estimated about $1.4 million. If you had $700,000 cash in this fund, you'd be okay. We're at 1.7 million. Some of that may have built up, when we went through the pandemic where we had all those extra health dollars. And so some of this may have gotten, as a result of that, have that much cash in that fund. Now you could, if you so choose, lower the levy in 2027 to use that cash, and it would move it back to the general fund if you didn't want that much cash sitting in the health fund. Page 13 is the CCD fund. And this fund, we're actually not utilizing all this now because we have moved some expenses out of here, such as bridges. And so this budget is in balance this year by $1.8 million. And so going forward, and I'm estimating that to be about 2 million. Now, interesting enough, this is a rate-driven fund, okay, 0.0333. As the assessed valuation goes down, this fund will generate less because it's a maximum rate of 0.0333. So you'll see that my levy is going down, but I'm still showing that budget imbalance all the way up to 2031 based on what we've been appropriated. Now, you could have one big project chew up all that cash in no time, but this is another place, though, that I would tell you to let's move the excise tax out, because this is $285,000 going into the cumulative capital development fund, which is very restricted in use. Capital, right? But if you take that and move it to the general fund, that's $285,000 that would help offset that $1.7 million deficit. Remember the $1.7 million deficit in the general fund. This truly makes it up because we're not moving expense. We're just moving the revenue out of this in this particular case. So this would be a win. And if it gets in your general fund, then you technically move it to rainy day if you wanted to, because if you recall years ago, we actually used to move some CCD money into rainy day, and then they went time out. We're not going to allow any units to do that anymore. So we've not been able to use that to build.
That was a way to get around the restrictions.
Pardon?
That was a way to get around the restrictions.
Yeah, right. We did several years we were able to do that.
And it also was for investment purposes as well.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a good, strong cash balance. And, again, the idea behind a cumulative fund is to build dollars up for big capital projects. It helps you lessen the amount of debt you have to issue at some point in the future. Okay, page 15. I'm going to try to speed this up so we stay within the hour here. This is the debt fund. Now, this is another place that overall our tax rate dropped this year. Okay, so for 26, let me start there. Our tax rate dropped because our assessed valuation went up 12.3%. I'm assuming that you would be comfortable keeping that same levy going forward, not increasing it, but keeping the same levy. Again, we're moving away from the rate conversation to a levy conversation. So you would issue more general obligation bonds based on the levy, not an estimated rate anymore. And what we'd be telling the community is saying, we just want to collect the same amount as we collected last year. That's actually less because you could justify that growing some because of the growth in the community and inflation. But that's my assumption. You will have to decide that. You and the commissioners would decide, how much you're going to issue in bonds and do you want to keep that same levy? I've assumed that you will in this model, but that's about $7 million a year. Now here is a win. Here's another big win. You see, I bolded off the page here, that $477,000 of excise tax. We could put that in the general fund and then lower our bond payment amount by that amount. Now that's a win because we're taking that revenue from a very restricted fund and putting it into the general fund. So that, we would lessen the bond amount by that amount that we keep of excise tax in the general fund. So that was a little win for us. So when you think about the $1.7 million that I showed you earlier, and think about the 200 some thousand in CCD that we could pull, and then you got another $500,000 here, we've taken a pretty good chunk out of that if you give that direction to move it all to the general fund. Page 18, this is the jail lit fund. I'm not saying we moved, we moved some expense back to the general fund last year already. We'll have to see how this plays out for 27. But I am showing a little bit of a deficit there. Now that, again, depending on what you do with raises. But this year, I'm actually showing the budget imbalance in jail lit fund by $1 million. A lot because that special distribution is so much this year, because we got so much more lit from that special distribution. That's the jail lit fund gets a portion of that. We do have $7.5 million encumbered towards that project that we didn't have it paid out yet. So at the end of 26, we have I'm estimating about $6.1 million in this fund. Of course, there's not property tax in this, and this revenue comes in consistent. But I am waving just a little bit of a caution flag on 27. We may have to consider moving some more expense to the general fund to keep this budget in balance. So this one's a little bit out of balance that I'm seeing in 27. We'll see where the sheriff's budget actually comes in when it gets submitted. One I'm really raising the caution flag on is page 19. I mentioned this last year. This is the state 911. There are not new dollars coming in here, and expenses are getting higher. And you can see right here, that for the last 4 years, actual, we've been spending more than we've taken in this fund. And I anticipate it again this year. And we will be out of cash at the end of this year in this fund. So, and so next year, there is a $500,000 problem there that we've got to either, now, you either have to move expense out of here, and that would be to the general fund, or, I know you're not going to like this, or in 29, you could raise a lit rate to balance it. I'm not saying you want to do that, but I'm just giving you your options. So that would be your call, but you wouldn't have to make that decision. But what you are going to have to make a decision on is next year, you're going to have to move some expense, at least in 27 to cover that budget going forward. That's no longer a caution flag. That's a red one. We got to do something there. The next fund is the Economic Development Fund, and we've been building cash just like the general fund. We have been budgeting and not spending the money in this fund, and we have appropriated this year $15 million. So that money that we collected 15 million in this fund, is going to be spent in the 26 budget. So, but then it starts to accumulate again, right? So then we're starting to build those dollars in this fund. They are not earmarked. The money that we earmarked actually was in the general fund. The bond that we did was in the general fund, and that I've got that actual payment built into the general fund now. So this fund is doing what it's supposed to do. We set it aside for highway, and it built up, and we're spending it. Most of it, I believe, on Smith Valley. That's probably the biggest portion of that. Yeah. Page 21, food and beverage. Our budget is out of balance by $477,000 this year. No problem on that. I'm not concerned about that because we have a cash balance. I'm estimating about $3.6 million at the end of this year. You've got cash to absorb that. But this is another one this is a caution flag because we've got cash and we can do this for a while. But this would say we're going to have to move some expense back out of this fund to the general fund at some point in the future. Not immediately. This is not an immediate caution flag. This is a future caution flag that we have a structural problem in what we're now. Our revenue's been growing. It really looks good when you look at our trends there. 3 million, 3.6 million, 3.9 million, 4 million, 150, 4 million, 346. I've continued to trend that up. You are getting you would have higher prices, you know, with food, and you'd have more people moving in. So I think it's reasonable. I think I used 3% increase a year on that as a revenue increase.
It's probably gonna be more than that, Mike, because we continue, as you know, to have to pay half of what we collect to the state until we
Oh, yeah.
collectively meet that 5 million. And I'll tell you what, Hamilton County's knocking it out of the park, buddy. We are now meeting that $5 million probably in the first 3 months.
Yeah,
We're used to, it took us 9 or 10 months.
right.
And so, and of course,
there-
once we get there, you know, we get to keep 100%.
Yeah, but isn't there a shelf life to that too? Are we coming to the end of that 5 million, or is that always going to be there?
I think it's perpetuity, but
Okay, Okay.
at some point, well, it's not perpetuity. It was supposed to be until they
pay the state.
satisfied all their debt on the convention center and
Yeah.
of course, the football stadium, which they'll never satisfy. They just keep
Yeah.
reissuing.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So I have not assumed a sunset on that,
Yeah.
but anyway, I've forecasted an increase there. You skip the next page, tax rates. I'll finish here and I'll be just within my hour allocation. So the good news, you know, we actually saw a tax decrease or tax rate decrease in 26. Mostly due to, well, two things. We didn't have a growth appeal, right? Didn't have a growth appeal. And we saw a 12.3% increase in our assessed valuation. So those two things, and we did raise our debt levy, but we didn't have to raise it all the way and still end up with a result of a decrease of 3.43. But as you can see the next year, that looks shocking on paper, 9%. But think about it, if your assessed valuation goes down 5%, you would naturally see if you collected the same amount, your rate would go up 5% as a result of that. But then you put 5.9% more levy on the maximum levy. If we keep the debt levy the same, when you blend all that together, it ends up with a 9% increase on the tax rate. So that looks shocking because we're not used to that, but I think that's what the state's expecting to happen across the state. Now, we don't have to make any decisions on that tonight. Obviously, we'll continue this conversation when we get to budget time. When we get to budget time, what's going to happen, when the books close June 30th, I go in and I estimate all the revenues again based on the first half of the year actual collection. I reforecast the last half. And then I get all the departmental budgets from the county auditor, pull those back into the fiscal plan, and then show you, all right, here's where I really think we are in the budget. And that's when you begin your decision making of tax rates and, you know, what you want to give and raises and what you want to approve in budgets. So this is just a really early preview, kind of summarizing what happened last legislative session, what happened in this legislative session, and where we are today. You're in a fortunate spot. You're in a strong cash position. There are not all units are in this position. We've got some caution flags. We've got some places to work on, but you've got time to work on them. There's some places that don't have that luxury and are going to have to react much quicker.
Okay, Mike, thank you. I would like to give each council member, I would like for them to share their thoughts and ask you if they, present any questions to you
Sure.
that they may have.
Sure.
So I believe we have Councilwoman Melinda Griesmer online. Melinda, would you please start and share your thoughts with us and any questions you may have for Mike Reuter at this time?
Mike, I, as always, appreciate you coming out every year and appreciate your thorough explanation of what's happening and how we're affected. This isn't something I can just say for sure what way I want to go. This is something I have to think on and mull over a period of days before I can come out with any kind of statement or feeling on anything. So that's my comment.
Fair enough.
Okay,
It's a lot. I apologize. It's a lot of information in an hour.
thank you, Melinda. Jonathan T. Myers, any thoughts or questions?
Just the thanks to Mike.
My pleasure.
John
I
Mallers.
think I agree with Melinda on this. It's a lot of stuff. I appreciate the options that you've given us for moving some things around. I would like to go over some various scenarios when later on this year when we get a chance when you've got through the June 30th stuff. So looking forward to that.
Miss Burton.
He may not want to talk to me.
I do.
This
Use the mic.
report came-
Give her the
Use the
microphone.
mic. Use the-
Sorry, we got this report yesterday afternoon and I will confess, I've been in this report longer than I've been in the bed, so.
Okay.
I have 9 pages of typed single line questions
Okay.
up here, but I will not go through them.
Okay. Thank you. If you'd like to, I would be happy to schedule another time with you individually.
With the president's permission,
Yeah.
I will send you the email. To
Yeah, sure.
review and validate and confirm, but I won't bore everyone this evening, but
Okay.
I did take the time. And I know everybody can't at this point, so I do agree with what Melinda said as well, but I do want to say that with my hours of study, that I'm taking this report as a warning. It's not a panic report, absolutely not. But, and yes, as you stated many times, we do have a very strong cash balance. But the trend going into the next budget cycle is very clear that the county is spending way faster than our recurring revenue. And it's growing, so especially in the general fund and the public safety related areas. So the report itself was marked draft, unaudited, internal management use only, and it warns that the actual results may vary materially. So
Thank you for noting that. This is early and there's a lot of assumptions built into that kind of a model, you can imagine.
understand that. But I personally am treating it as a planning tool and not the gospel. But the direction of the numbers do matter. And obviously, we're going in one direction. We're not broke, we know that. But the county's using cash reserves to support our current level of spending. And if that pattern continues, the budget cycle needs to focus more on structural balance. And not just whether there's enough cash in the bank today to cover what we want to spend. We do have a cushion, but that cushion, in my opinion, is being used very heavily. This council currently has the time, and we do have the cash to make very smart decisions. And but this report is exactly the report that says we need to do the hard work now before the decisions become even harder later. So, and I don't want to sound negative. I just want to be reliable and to be honest. So I heard several times that we've got plenty of cash. We've got plenty of cash.
But the structural, when I'm looking at a budget, I'm always looking at the structural forecast
Right.
of where things are going. Cash can be used on one-time things, but it's not a recurring revenue.
Taxpayer,
Yeah.
that's gonna sound like you have no problems. Come on, why can't we do this? And
Right.
that's, being responsible, we do need to look at not just what we immediately have, but what's coming down the road. So,
And that's the whole idea behind the model. It is a model to kind of try and take assumptions and what's the trends look like, and so that you can react to trends before you hit the wall.
so you don't have to deal with me next year. So,
Okay.
this year. That's all.
That's all.
That's all. You want my notes?
First of all, thanks, Mike. That was really informative and overwhelming. There's a lot there, a lot to digest. And I think Pam kind of summed it up. As I look through this and kind of hear the fact that we're seeing some declining balances, but it's okay. And you're not saying this, but it's kind of like acceptable because we have plenty of cash balance on which to rely on. I just want to make sure we don't get complacent and we address problems, fix problems. And the other thing that I think we talked about is the revenue and increasing the revenue. And I start thinking about each unit starting to behave like they're CEOs of their own unit and start talking about expenditures. You're not gonna cut your way to prosperity. I realize that, but that's a place to consider as far as helping that overall deficit or not. But the cash balance, if you're spending money, it's taking money. So that's kind of where my mind goes. And I don't know exactly what I mean specifically by that, but generally speaking,
Yes,
fair
fair enough.
about that much.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, but thank you.
Mr. Bates?
Yes, this is my second bite at the apple. And so I just would like to say this time, somebody's overwhelming, as you said, the numbers, and we went through this process last year. My only comment at this time is this: I think you're a great asset to our council and to our county for helping us get through this process, which I've been reminded is one of our statutory duties. So I know that it helped tremendously last year, and I'm glad you're on board with us and to help guide us through this next budget process.
Thank you for those kind words.
All right, I guess I'm up next. I did want to piggyback on something Pam talked about, those strong cash balances that the county has. John and I were at a AIC meeting on Monday, and there was some caution raised about these cash balances. And the importance of having a strong cash balance. The property tax revenue has always been a very stable model and predictor of, what our revenue would be moving forward. As the state is pushing us more towards a lit revenue driven revenue stream, it's not as stable as our real estate property values are. So we need to be prepared for downturns in the economy. And those are, depressions and recessions, and those are real. And when that happens, that cash flow will decrease substantially. And then we will be glad and fortunate to have these cash balances on hand, because our revenue stream will not be as stable as our property tax has been. But Mike, I do want to thank you for your expertise, knowledge and expertise. You're a great asset to have on hand. And I will say that Johnson County has greatly benefited from conservative fiscal planning and the prudent decisions of prior councils. Because of that, we do remain in a healthy financial position with ample cash reserves, which I do feel are that much more important as we move towards a lit-driven revenue stream. However, the information presented tonight shows that projected county expenses are exceeding projected revenue. This is something that I feel council must address now rather than later. Using cash reserves to fund recurring expenses, and I know that's something, you and I have discussed and agreed upon. Using those cash reserves to fund recurring expenses is not sustainable. Looking ahead to budget time, as grant funding changes, user fee collections fluctuate, and SEA1 creates uncertainty, we need to be careful not to simply shift ongoing expenses into the general fund or lit fund as a routine solution. We need to review expenses, look for efficiencies, and make sure taxpayer dollars are being used responsibly. I do feel that department heads, elected officials, and this council all share in that responsibility. And anyone who spent any time looking through this information that you provided to us can see that our current financial position is strong, but long-term stability depends on cautious, sustainable budget decisions moving forward. And these are just some of the things that we are going to be considering when we create this year's budget guidelines, and particularly when we review department budgets. And I know Pam, I've seen Pam's questions, and they are in depth and they are spot on and they are pertinent. And I don't know if we should wait till after the June 30th, or maybe we should go ahead and schedule a meeting with you, the president, vice president, and Pam, and start to tackle some of these issues now. So I would like to maybe shoot you an email, Mike, and see what dates or times you might have available when we can get together and meet
Okay.
and start getting ahead of some of this. And then some of those questions may be resolved without another meeting once we get those June 30th numbers. Does that sound like something that you
No,
would be?
I'd be happy to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Again, thank you for all the work that you put into this. I
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it. I don't know if the commissioners have any comments, but at this time, I would entertain a motion for the council portion to, be adjourned unless the commissioners have additional questions.
I don't have any additional questions. I've got several things that I could comment on, but I won't do it at this time. But Mike, you are an invaluable source, I tell you, and we greatly appreciate what you do for us.
Thank you.
Mike, with setting this draft up, do you anticipate, I mean, I know you get your finger on the pulse down at the State House. Do you anticipate them taking anything up this year that's going to derail or increase or do anything with what you put together? Or are they kind of hold back?
For 27, I feel like I've got a pretty good handle for 27. What I don't know is, will they try to take property tax reform farther in the next session? And that would
Yes.
affect, that would affect the 28 budget. So right now for 27, I feel like I have a pretty good pulse to what I anticipate these certifications to be. Now LIT's always a wild card, local option income tax, and I'm using a conservative number there, but my property tax number should not vary greatly. And so if I have a caution flag, it's the next legislative session. I have a feeling, as a result of some of these Musk group meetings throughout the state, you're going to see new lobbying forces from that. And so what that looks like, I don't know yet. I would say last year was quite possibly the most difficult legislative session I've ever been through.
We took a picture of you when you came in and met with us. Your look on your face,
Yeah.
Mike, as everybody, Adam, I'm sure
Yeah.
you were the same way.
Yeah.
So, okay, I just wanted to know if you had anything
Yeah.
from down at State House that might change. Everybody's trying to plan on an unplannable future.
Right. Obviously a wild card for you is what happens with, what are you going to adopt? That has to happen right now at some point. So
Okay, thank you. You did a great job too.
thank you.
Take a drink of water soon.
Yeah, I'll take that with me.
And I want to thank Ms. President for her comments, Ms. Burton and Mr. Dittmers. You're spot on. I think we've got a lot to deal with. We've got a lot to think about. The state's not going to stop attacking. It's going to continue. Being down at the State House as much as I have been and I will be, there will be a lot of reform that's going to take place. It's not going to be to a positive for local government. It never is. And if anyone's read my article in the Daily Journal, they'll understand what I'm saying. I said then, and I'm still saying today, we won't see the full impact of this till 28, 29, 30 and beyond. And it is not going to be a pretty sight. And I don't care how hard we fight. It's not going to be a pretty sight. But we're going to continue to fight, and we're going to continue to be down there giving our force as much as we can and keep this going at a steady pace of fighting all this that they're doing to try to destroy local government. So we'll work on it. We'll continue to work on it. But I do appreciate the comments the three of you made, and I understand that the others will come up with comments too as they get more in depth into this. But I do appreciate it, and I think we're going in the right direction. And I want to thank Mike also for his input on that and helping keep us straight and going the correct
pleasure.
direction in Johnson County. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
May I? I don't think I said thank you all ago. I was so ready to. So,
No problem.
I personally have worked with you for what, 30 years?
Yeah, long
So
time.
I do appreciate your work, Mike, and I by no means am an expert at anything, but without your guidance, I wouldn't be able to understand near what we do, or I do. So thank you.
Thank you.
And with that being said, I'll make a motion to adjourn the council portion of the meeting.
All right, I have a motion to
Second.
adjourn from Pam Burton, second by John Mallers. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
I'll entertain a motion also.
Move to adjourn, sir.
Have a motion and second. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Yeah.